The sun over Kandahar was merciless. Its heat pressed down like a smothering blanket, shimmering off the desert floor, bending the air itself. Corporal James Walker adjusted the strap of his helmet, sweat dripping down the side of his face. Dust caked his lips, gritty and bitter. His patrol had been out for hours, 8 men moving cautiously through the valley, rifles cradled tight, scanning ridgelines for the kind of danger that always seemed to wait just beyond the horizon. The valley looked lifeless, but Walker had learned in Afghanistan that silence meant nothing. Danger hid in stillness. The jagged rocks were perfect cover for enemy fighters. He hated how the place could turn from barren wasteland to battlefield in a heartbeat. Every step forward was a gamble, and today his gut churned like a storm was coming. "Stay sharp," Walker muttered into his radio. His voice was steady, but his knuckles whitened against the grip of his M82 Barrett. The weapon wasn't standard issue for patrols, but Walker had insisted on carrying it. At 6'2" with arms like steel beams, he was one of the few in the platoon who could haul the monster rifle without slowing down. Heavy, brutal, and terrifyingly accurate, the Barrett was both his comfort and his curse. It could rip through walls and vehicles, but its bulk made him a slower target. Still, it was his lifeline. The patrol moved in a staggered formation, eyes darting. Behind Walker, a woman in dusty fatigues moved quietly, almost too quietly. She had joined them 2 days earlier, transferred in without explanation. No one had asked questions. Orders were orders, but her presence unsettled the men. She didn't joke, didn't complain, didn't even speak much. Just marched in silence, her face unreadable, her eyes always scanning. Walker had barely caught her name, Morgan. That was it, nothing else. He tried not to dwell on it, but something about her felt off. She wasn't green, not by the way she carried herself. Her posture, her focus, she moved like someone who had been here before, someone who belonged in shadows rather than daylight. The crack of a rifle shattered the silence. The first bullet struck the dirt a foot from Sergeant Davis's boots, throwing sand into the air. Then came the echo of gunfire, bouncing between the ridges. The valley exploded with chaos. "Contact! Contact!" Davis roared, diving behind a rock. The squad scrambled, seeking cover where there was none. Walker's heart slammed against his ribs as rounds whizzed overhead, slamming into the ground, ricocheting off stone. He dropped to his knees, Barrett braced, eyes scanning for the source. He spotted movement high on the ridge, a glint of metal. Enemy sniper. He swung the massive rifle up, fingers squeezing the trigger. Click. Nothing. Walker's stomach dropped. He yanked at the bolt, sweat mixing with dust on his fingers. Jammed. Not now. Not now. The enemy's fire pinned them down, ripping through their position. One man cried out, clutching his leg. Another fired blindly upward, bullets spraying into rock. Walker cursed under his breath, fumbling with the Barrett. His weapon, his lifeline, had betrayed him. Each second wasted meant another man could die. His hands trembled not from fear, but from rage and desperation. Beside him, the woman slid into cover, her expression calm, almost detached. Her uniform was smeared with dirt, her face streaked with sweat, but her eyes were sharp, focused. She crouched low, watching him struggle with the jammed weapon. "Give it here," she said, her voice low, steady. Walker hesitated. The Barrett wasn't just any weapon, it was his. He didn't hand it off to anyone. But another burst of gunfire cracked overhead, a round sparking inches from his head. He looked at her, really looked, and in that instant, saw no panic, no hesitation. She knew what she was doing. Without another thought, he shoved the rifle into her hands. She took it like it weighed nothing. Her fingers danced over the jammed mechanism with startling speed. In seconds, The chamber cleared. She slid a fresh round in, pressed the scope to her eye, and fired. The echo rolled through the valley, thunderous and final. High on the ridge, the glint of metal vanished. A body tumbled from the rocks, striking the sand below. Walker blinked, stunned. That had been an impossible shot, a distance most snipers would struggle with. She hadn't even flinched. Her breathing was steady, her movements fluid, like she had done this 1,000 times before. "Sniper's down," she said flatly, handing the rifle back. Walker took it, his hands still trembling. He couldn't find words. Around them, the squad regrouped, firing back with renewed focus. The enemy had lost their eye in the sky, and momentum shifted. But Walker barely registered the fight. His mind was stuck on what he had just seen. Who the hell was she? The firefight raged on, bullets slicing the air, but Walker couldn't stop stealing glances at her. She fired her own rifle with ruthless precision. Each shot deliberate, controlled. She wasn't just good, she was surgical. Every movement screamed experience. But why was she here, marching quietly with a regular squad? Why had no one told him? As the minutes dragged, the enemy's fire weakened. Bodies littered the ridge, and the squad's counterattack forced the ambushers into retreat. Dust and smoke hung in the air, the smell of gunpowder thick. Slowly, silence reclaimed the valley. Walker sat back against a rock, chest heaving, ears ringing. He checked his Barrett. It was fine now. The jam cleared, as though it had never happened. But his weapon didn't comfort him anymore. What unsettled him wasn't the firefight. It was her. The woman named Morgan crouched a few feet away, reloading calmly, her face unreadable. To her, the ambush seemed routine, just another day in a long line of battles. She hadn't shown fear, hadn't even blinked when the first shots rang out. Walker stared at her, questions burning inside. He had fought alongside plenty of soldiers, but none like her. Her control, her focus, it was beyond training. It was instinct. He remembered the way she had cleared his Barrett, the impossible. Speed, the confidence of someone who had handled the weapon 100 times. Most soldiers weren't even allowed to touch it. But she had treated it like an old friend. "Who are you?" he whispered under his breath, though no one heard. The squad began to regroup, checking ammo, tending to wounds. Sergeant Davis barked orders, trying to shake the men from their rattled nerves. But Walker couldn't shake his thoughts. He had seen something in Morgan's eyes when she pulled that trigger. Something cold, heavy, unshakable. She wasn't just another soldier. And deep down, Walker knew this ambush was only the beginning. The battlefield had quieted, but silence in Afghanistan was deceptive. Corporal James Walker knew better than to trust it. The ridge ahead was littered with bodies, but valleys like this had a way of birthing more fighters out of shadows. He tightened his grip on the Barrett, now cleared and working again, though his hands still remembered the helplessness of those jammed seconds. His weapon had failed him. She hadn't. The woman Morgan sat on one knee, reloading her standard issue rifle with practiced ease. Dust streaked her face, but her movements were precise, calculated. No wasted motion, no wasted time. The squad kept sneaking glances at her, whispers passing through the men despite Sergeant Davis's barked orders to stay sharp. Walker didn't blame them. He had seen it too. The way she'd lifted the Barrett, like it was a simple M4, how she'd fired with uncanny calm. The kill had been instantaneous. No hesitation, no second shot. Snipers like that didn't just appear. They were made, crafted, forged through endless hours of training and combat most soldiers never lived to describe. "Keep eyes up," Davis snapped, but even his voice carried an undertone of unease. "We move in 5. The squad fanned out, checking ammo, tightening straps, watching the ridge for any signs of movement. Walker leaned against a boulder, Barrett resting across his lap. He stole another glance at Morgan. She ignored everyone, her attention fixed on the distance. Her breathing was steady, her face unreadable. She was a ghost in the flesh. Finally, curiosity burned too strong. Walker shifted closer. "That wasn't your first time handling a Barrett," he said quietly. She didn't look at him. No. Simple, flat, no elaboration. Walker frowned. "Not many get the chance. Hell, half the guys in our platoon couldn't even carry it for an hour without their back giving out." Her jaw tightened slightly, but her eyes never left the horizon. "It's just a tool. Just a tool." Walker almost laughed. The Barrett wasn't a tool, it was a beast. It kicked like a mule, weighed as much as a bag of bricks, and had the power to tear through concrete walls. Most soldiers respected it. Some feared it. She dismissed it as if it were a wrench. "You're not regular infantry," Walker pressed. Her eyes flicked to him then, cold, sharp, and unyielding. "Neither is this conversation." Walker felt the sting, but didn't back down. He wasn't prying out of idle curiosity. He needed to know who he was fighting beside. But before he could respond, gunfire cracked again, sharp and sudden. "Down!" Davis roared. The squad dove for cover as bullets ripped across the valley. The enemy wasn't gone. They'd regrouped, circling, determined to finish what they started. Walker dropped behind a boulder. Barrett pressed against his shoulder. Through the scope, he scanned the ridgeline. Shapes moved between rocks fast. Coordinated. These weren't just ragtag fighters. This was a planned ambush. Beside him, Morgan was already firing. No hesitation, no wasted rounds. Each shot was deliberate, controlled. Walker watched through his scope as one of her bullets struck a fighter. Mid-sprint, dropping him instantly. Another round, another kill. She fired like she was counting, like each pull of the trigger carried weight. The squad returned fire, but it was clear who was leading the fight. Not Davis, not Walker. Soldiers found themselves syncing with her rhythm, firing when she fired, advancing when she shifted position. Her calmness was contagious, bleeding into men who had been seconds from panic. Walker adjusted the Barrett and fired, the recoil slamming into his shoulder. The round tore through a stone wall and the man behind it, sending dust and blood spraying into the air. He chambered another, but when he glanced sideways, Morgan had already dropped 2 more fighters with clinical precision. "Jesus," one of the privates muttered, ducking behind cover. "Who is she?" No one answered. Walker fired again, but even he found himself relying on her presence. It wasn't just her skill, it was the way she didn't flinch, didn't falter. Under the hail of bullets, she was composed, as though the firefight were routine. "Where?" Others breathed hard and cursed. She moved with eerie steadiness. Minutes dragged into eternity. Finally, the gunfire waned, enemy fighters retreating once more. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breathing of the squad. The ground was littered, with spent casings and bodies sprawled in unnatural stillness. Walker lowered the Barrett slowly, muscles trembling from adrenaline. He turned his head. Morgan was kneeling, reloading calmly, her face unchanged. She could have been firing at paper targets for all the emotion she showed. The squad gathered, shaken but alive. Davis barked orders to check ammo, check each other, but his voice lacked conviction. His eyes, too, kept flicking to her. Walker approached, crouching down beside her. "That was more than training," he said quietly. "I've seen trained marksmen freeze up out here. You move like this is second nature." She locked, the magazine in place, and finally met his gaze. Her eyes weren't cold this time, they were heavy, burdened. For a split second, Walker saw something behind them, something that looked like regret. Second nature isn't always a gift, she said softly. Walker frowned, caught off guard by the weight in her voice. He opened his mouth to ask more, but she stood abruptly, slinging her rifle. We should move before they regroup again. Davis called for formation, and the squad prepared to advance. Walker rose too, but his thoughts tangled in knots. He had fought alongside good shooters before, but Morgan was different. She wasn't. Just trained, she was forged. The battlefield didn't rattle her. It was as if she had been born in it. As they pushed forward, Walker hung back slightly, watching her. Every step she took, every glance she cast, was deliberate. He noticed how she always positioned herself where she could see the widest field, how she scanned rooftops and ridges more than ground level. She wasn't moving like a regular soldier on patrol. She was moving like a sniper on the hunt. And yet no sniper walked into a regular infantry squad without reason. "Who are you, Morgan?" he muttered under his breath, unheard over the crunch of boots and gear. The squad advanced cautiously, nerves still frayed, but their survival Walker knew had hinged on her. And though the valley stretched ahead, silent once more, Walker's mind was louder than ever. She had saved his life. She had saved all of them. But with every shot she fired, every kill she made so effortlessly, Walker couldn't shake the truth growing inside him. This woman was dangerous, not just to the enemy, to everyone including herself. The air was still thick with gunpowder, the valley echoing with the memory of gunfire. Corporal James Walker's pulse hadn't settled. Each heartbeat still drummed in his ears, pounding against the silence that had returned too suddenly, too unnaturally. Silence out here was a lie. It always was. He crouched low, Barrett steady, scanning the ridgeline again. But it wasn't his eyes that caught the threat first. Morgan stiffened. Her head tilted slightly, her gaze narrowing on the jagged rocks. Above them, she didn't say a word, didn't call out. She simply shifted, dropped into a prone position, and raised her rifle. The crack of her shot came a heartbeat before the enemy did. A fighter crumpled mid-step on the ridge, tumbling forward, his weapon clattering away. His comrades surged out of cover a second later, pouring fire down into the valley. Dust exploded around the squad, bullets snapping past their ears. Contact. "Left ridge," Davis shouted, diving behind a boulder. Lay suppressing fire. The squad obeyed, rifles barking, but their shots were wild, more noise than precision. Walker swung the Barrett up, firing once, twice, sending rounds slamming into the ridge. One insurgent vanished in a mist of blood, but there were too many. They had been waiting, letting the squad advance deeper before springing the second wave. Walker's jaw clenched. "It's a kill box," he muttered under his breath. The enemy fire intensified, coordinated and merciless. The squad was trapped. Then Morgan moved. She crawled forward, calm as ever, planting herself on an outcrop that gave her a cleaner angle. While the rest of them fired blindly, she took her time. Each pull of her trigger sent another fighter collapsing. She wasn't just shooting, she was dismantling the enemy, piece by piece, like she was solving a puzzle only she could see. Walker couldn't help but watch. He had seen sharpshooters before, but not like this. Her rhythm was steady, her breathing controlled, her eyes never wavering. She didn't miss, not once. The squad began to adjust without even realizing it. They fired when she paused, moved when she shifted. Her control was infectious, rippling through the men until their panic dulled. "Keep with her pace." Walker barked, catching the flow himself. "Don't waste rounds, match her fire." Davis glanced at him, then at her, and for once didn't argue. He just nodded. Walker braced the Barrett, taking aim at a machine gunner setting up on the ridge. His shot ripped through the sandbag wall and into the man's chest, silencing the weapon before it could pin them down. The recoil hammered into his shoulder, but the sight of the gunner collapsing gave him fuel. He reloaded and fired again, this time at a group trying to flank left. But Morgan was already on them. Her bullet dropped the lead fighter, sending the others scattering back. "Jesus Christ," Private Harris whispered beside him. "She's not human." Walker didn't answer. The fight dragged. Every second stretched thin. Bullets snapped off rocks. Dirt sprayed into the air, but slowly, methodically, the tide shifted. Morgan's precision thinned the enemy line, breaking their coordination. The squad, once scattered and frantic, found strength in her steadiness. Even Davis stopped barking orders, watching her work with a strange mix of awe and unease. Walker fired again, his Barrett thundering across the valley. Through the scope, he saw another insurgent fall, and for a fleeting second, pride swelled in his chest. But then his eyes flicked toward her. Morgan had already lined up her next target, her face expressionless, her trigger squeeze smooth. Another body fell. He realized with a jolt that he was measuring his worth against hers, and losing. The ridge finally began to quiet. Survivors fled into the distance, abandoning their dead. Gunfire dwindled to scattered pops, then to nothing at all. The valley grew still, save for the labored breaths of the squad. Walker lowered the Barrett, muscles trembling. He swallowed hard, glancing at the others. They were alive by some. Miracle, still standing, but they all knew why. Morgan rose slowly from her prone position, brushing dust from her fatigues. Her rifle still smoked faintly, the barrel hot from use. She didn't celebrate, didn't speak, didn't even acknowledge what she'd just done. She simply checked her weapon and her pack, as though this were just another drill. The men stared at her in silence, some with gratitude, some with fear. Walker finally broke it. "That wasn't just training," he said, his voice rough. She didn't look at him. "We move before they regroup. Don't dodge me." He pressed. No regular soldier pulls shots like that under fire. Hell, most snipers would choke under that pressure. Her gaze flicked to him at last, steady and cold. "Focus on survival, Corporal, not on me." Before he could respond, Davis called for the squad to form up. The sergeant's voice was gruff, but his eyes lingered on Morgan longer than usual. He didn't question her either, not openly. They began to move, stepping carefully over spent casings and bodies strewn across the sand. The smell of blood hung heavy, mingling with the acrid sting of gunpowder. Walker walked behind her, Barrett resting heavy on his shoulder. Each step, his thoughts gnawed at him. She had saved them, saved him, but that wasn't what unsettled him. It was the way she had done it. She hadn't just fought. She had controlled the battle. Like a chess master, moving pieces only she could see. Like she had fought this exact fight 100 times before. And she had killed with a kind of efficiency that chilled him to his core. Not rage, not adrenaline, not even pride, just inevitability. Walker swallowed, his throat dry. The woman walking silently ahead of him wasn't just a soldier. She wasn't even just a sniper. She was something else entirely. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized something terrifying. This battle hadn't turned because of luck. It hadn't turned because of the squad. It had turned because of her. And Walker wasn't sure if that made them safer, or put them in even greater danger than before. The desert was quiet again, but the quiet was broken. Corporal James Walker had learned long ago that after a firefight, silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like the battlefield holding its breath. The valley carried ghosts now, spent. Shells glittered in the sand like teeth. Bodies sprawled where they had fallen, weapons scattered in frozen surrender. The squad moved stiffly among the wreckage, checking for signs of life, gathering weapons, securing the area. Sergeant Davis barked orders with a hoarse voice, but the fire in his tone had dimmed. Even he knew they'd been seconds away from annihilation, and the only reason they weren't all corpses bleeding into the dust was the woman now walking a few feet ahead. Morgan. She moved with unnerving calm, her rifle slung across her back, scanning the distance as if expecting another wave. Her face was unreadable, the same cool mask she had worn through the chaos. But to Walker, her silence screamed louder than the gunfire had. She wasn't rattled, not even shaken. Walker's hands were still trembling from adrenaline, the Barrett heavier than usual against his shoulder. His body ached, his ears rang, but his eyes kept tracking her, the way she held herself, the way she walked, like a predator who hadn't stopped hunting. They regrouped near the shadow of an outcrop. The squad collapsed into what little shade the rocks offered, canteens raised, hands shaking. Private Harris muttered a prayer under his breath, while Davis leaned against the stone, wiping blood and grit from his cheek. Walker slid down beside his pack, the Barrett laid across his knees. He pulled off his helmet, dragging a hand through. Sweat-soaked hair. His pulse still hadn't slowed. He looked up just in time to see Morgan crouch near her gear, adjusting her vest. She moved like clockwork, methodical, almost too practiced. That's when he saw it. Something metallic slipped, loose from her chest pocket as she shifted, catching the sunlight. It clinked softly against the stone before falling into the dust. A medal. At first, Walker thought it was some standard commendation pin, maybe a marksmanship badge, or one of the countless tokens soldiers carried for luck. But as he bent forward and picked it up, brushing the sand from its surface, he froze. It wasn't standard issue. It wasn't even official military issue. It was personal. And etched into the back, crudely yet deliberately, were words that made his stomach twist. 305 confirmed eliminations. Walker stared, blood running cold. His thumb traced the grooves of the numbers, as if touching them would change them, erase them. But they were real, solid, permanent. 305. Not kills, not statistics, eliminations. He looked up slowly. Morgan was watching him. Her expression was blank, but her eyes, those eyes flashed with something darker. Not fear, not anger, just inevitability. She extended her hand silently, palm open. Walker hesitated, metal heavy in his grip. "This is yours?" he asked, his voice low, strained. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence between them screamed. Confirmation. The others hadn't noticed yet. Harris was still muttering prayers. Davis was scrawling notes into his field log, and the rest were too busy nursing wounds or reloading magazines. It was just him and her. Walker turned the medal over once more, reading the inscription again. 305 confirmed eliminations. He couldn't wrap his head around it. He had seen combat. He had killed. Enough times that he stopped counting years ago. But 305? That wasn't just a soldier's record. That was impossible. Or worse, it was real. He handed it back slowly, his hand brushing against hers for the briefest moment. She tucked it into her vest without a word. Her movements sharp, defensive, final. Walker exhaled, his chest tight. "Who the hell are you?" Her eyes flicked to his, and for the first time, he saw something beneath the mask. Not pride, not arrogance. Something heavier. Regret. Before she could respond, Davis's voice cut through the air. "Pack it up. We're moving. I don't want to be sitting ducks when their friends come looking." The squad groaned, gathering their gear, but Walker barely heard them. His gaze stayed locked on her as she rose to her feet, slinging her rifle across her shoulder, like a shadow she couldn't shed. She had saved them, yes. She had turned the battle in their favor. But Walker couldn't unsee that metal. Couldn't unhear the silent weight of those numbers. Every soldier carried ghosts, but hers weren't ghosts. They were an army. They moved out again, their boots crunching over sand and stone, leaving behind the valley of death. Walker walked behind her, his beret heavy in his hands, his thoughts heavier still. He tried to imagine what 305 kills looked like. 305 faces. 305 families. What kind of person lived with that number carved into their soul? Hours passed as the squad trudged forward, the sun sinking toward the horizon. They didn't speak much battle-drained words from men. But Walker's silence wasn't exhaustion. It was calculation. At one point, Morgan slowed, scanning the ridgeline. Walker caught up beside her, unable to hold his tongue. That metal, he said quietly, his voice low enough only she could hear. You keep it hidden, but not buried. Why? Her jaw clenched. Because forgetting is worse than remembering. Walker blinked, caught off guard by the honesty in her tone. He opened his mouth to press further, but she quickened her pace, leaving him in her wake. As night fell, they made camp in the shelter of a narrow ravine. Fires were forbidden, so they ate cold rations under a sky littered with stars. The men sat in a loose circle, murmuring in low voices. Every now and then, someone's eyes darted toward Morgan, but no one asked. Walker sat, a little apart, cleaning his beret, though his mind was far from the weapon. He couldn't shake the image of that metal in his hand, the weight of the inscription. She wasn't just another soldier. She wasn't even just a sniper. She was something else, something the army had tried to bury, yet couldn't erase. Ghost. Walker realized something chilling then. The battlefield had revealed a sliver of who she was. But the full truth? That was still out there, lurking in the shadows of her silence. And if fate had placed her in their squad, it wasn't by accident. He just didn't know yet whether she was here to save them or to drag them into the darkness she carried with her. The desert had a way of swallowing sound, of turning conversation into whispers carried off by the wind. Yet in the nights that followed the ambush, Corporal James Walker found that whispers clung to Morgan like shadows. They moved cautiously. Across hostile ground, a battered squad carrying fresh scars from battle. The men had questions, though most were too afraid to voice them. They had all seen Morgan fight. They had watched her steady hands transform a jammed beret into a lifeline, had seen her shots crack like lightning bolts across the ridgeline. No one with sense could call her ordinary. But war had taught soldiers to respect silence. Some things, they decided, were better left unasked. Walker wasn't so sure. He carried the image of that metal with him, the inscription carved into its back, the haunting number burned into his mind. 305 confirmed eliminations. The digits marched behind his eyes whenever he closed them, each one heavier than the last. One night, as the squad camped in the shallow ruins of an old compound, Walker couldn't take the silence any longer. Who is she, really? He asked, his voice low but firm, directed at Sergeant Davis. The sergeant didn't look up from the map he was studying under the glow of a red lens flashlight. He chewed the inside of his cheek, a habit he had when weighing his words. Finally, he exhaled. She's a soldier. Same as you, same as me. That's all you need to know. That's not all I need to know, Walker pressed. You saw her. That wasn't training you pick up in a regular unit. She's something else. Special Forces? JSOC? What? Davis's eyes flicked up, hard as stone. Drop it, Walker. Some questions don't have answers you want. Walker clenched his jaw. It wasn't the first time Davis had shut him down, but this time the refusal stung differently. It wasn't ignorance, it was knowledge wrapped in warning. The sergeant knew more than he was letting on. Later, when the others had drifted to uneasy sleep, Walker lay awake on his bedroll, staring at the cracked ceiling above. The metal seemed to burn a hole in his thoughts. He couldn't let it go. He remembered stories he'd heard in passing during his first deployment. Half-jokes told in dark tents, rumors traded between green recruits desperate to scare each other. Stories of a ghost sniper, a woman whose kill count was whispered like folklore. Nobody had ever proven it, nobody had ever named her, but the numbers people claimed lined up far too neatly. 300. Maybe more. He'd laughed it off back then. But now, with that metal etched in his memory, he wasn't laughing. Next day, while they waited for a resupply convoy in a barren wadi, Walker found himself near Private Harris, who was cleaning his rifle with trembling hands. Harris had been rattled ever since the ambush. He looked at Morgan with something between awe and fear. "She's not normal," Harris muttered almost to himself. Walker leaned in. "What do you mean?" Harris swallowed hard. "Back at Camp Bastion, before the patrol, I overheard some guys from another unit. They said we were getting someone. Off the record, someone whose name wasn't in the roster. They called her a phantom. I thought it was just talk. But," he shook his head, "I saw her shoot, Corporal. That wasn't human." Walker's pulse quickened. He wanted to push Harris for more, but the private shut down, eyes darting nervously toward Morgan, as if speaking too loud might summon. Her gaze. Over the next few days, Walker began piecing together fragments. A corporal in another platoon swore he'd seen her photo once in a classified briefing. No name, just a face tied to Tier 1 operations. An older staff sergeant recalled an unnamed female sniper deployed years earlier, who'd vanished from records after a controversial mission. A medic whispered about a soldier so effective in Afghanistan's early years that command had buried her existence to avoid political scrutiny. Each rumor was like a shard of glass useless alone, but together they formed a jagged picture. Morgan wasn't just a soldier. She wasn't even just a legend. She was erased. Walker's obsession grew. He began noticing small details, the way she set her watch 5 minutes ahead, as if always braced for what came next. The way her hands never trembled, even when patching her boots in the cold. The way her eyes never closed fully when she rested, lids hovering as if she feared. The dark. All the signs of someone who had lived too long in war's shadows. One night, under a sky scattered with stars like broken glass, Walker made his move. The squad was dozing in shifts, and Morgan sat alone on a crumbled wall, cleaning her rifle with mechanical precision. He approached quietly, careful not to spook her. "I know you're not just another soldier," he said softly. Her hands stilled. Slowly, she looked up. Her eyes caught the starlight, sharp and weary. "And what do you think I am, Corporal?" Walker hesitated. "I think you're the ghost they told stories about, the sniper they tried to erase, the one with the number." A long silence stretched between them. Then, to his surprise, she smiled, but it was a bitter, humorless thing. "Stories always leave out the truth," she said. Walker swallowed. "So tell me the truth." Her gaze hardened. "The truth isn't for you." "Not yet." She stood, slinging the rifle across her shoulder, and brushed past him without another word. Walker remained frozen, heart pounding. Her refusal wasn't denial. It was confirmation. She was exactly who the rumors whispered about. And the truth she carried was too heavy, too dangerous to share. In the days that followed, Walker couldn't shake the knowing sense that he was caught in something bigger than himself. Every time he looked at Morgan, he didn't just see the soldier who had saved his life. He saw a classified file walking in human form, pages redacted in black ink, secrets heavy enough to topple governments. But what unsettled him most wasn't the number carved into that metal. It was the question it left unanswered. How many of those 305 had haunted her dreams? And how many more would be added before the war was done? The desert was always loud in the day, convoys rumbling, radios crackling, boots crunching gravel, but at night it fell eerily silent. Silence in Afghanistan wasn't peace. It was pressure. It pressed into men's chests, filled their thoughts with unwelcome ghosts. For Corporal James Walker, the silence had a new weight. It carried the number 305. He'd seen the metal himself, its edges scuffed, its inscription carefully etched, almost reverently. 305 confirmed eliminations. No matter how many times he tried to rationalize it, the thought kept burning in his mind. That was more than just a tally. That was a ledger of lives taken, one shot at a time. And Morgan carried it alone. That night, their squad had dug into a dry riverbed for cover. The cold bit sharply at exposed skin. Soldiers lay in a staggered line of shallow foxholes, rifles within reach, helmets tilted over tired eyes. Walker found himself restless, staring into the fire's low embers. Across the way, he saw Morgan. She wasn't asleep. She never seemed to be. She sat a few yards from the fire, perched on an overturned ammo crate, hands resting on her knees. Her rifle leaned against her shoulder, like a companion. She wasn't scanning the horizon. She wasn't even cleaning her gear. She was simply staring. At first, Walker thought she was looking at the sand. Then he realized her eyes were fixed far beyond, at something no one else could see. Walker hesitated, then rose and crossed the distance between them. He crouched nearby, careful not to invade her space. "You don't sleep much," he said quietly. Her lips twitched, a shadow of a smirk. "Neither do you." "Not lately." He paused. "Too much on my mind." She gave a faint nod. "That's war. It fills your head, empties your chest." They sat in silence for a while, the fire snapping softly behind them. Walker studied her face in the faint starlight. She looked carved from stone-sharp cheekbones, eyes cold but not unkind, mouth set in a line that spoke of years carrying burdens others couldn't imagine. Finally, Walker said the words he'd been holding back. "That number. 305. Shoulders stiffened. For a long time she didn't move. Then, slowly, she exhaled. "You weren't supposed to see that." "I didn't mean to," Walker admitted. "But I did. And I can't stop thinking about it." Morgan's gaze stayed on the horizon. "Most people don't want to think about it." Walker leaned forward. "I need to understand. How do you carry something like that?" Her laugh was low, bitter. "You don't carry it. It carries you." She shifted, resting her elbows on her knees, fingers laced together. Her voice lowered, but the sharpness never left. "They weren't just numbers, Walker. They were faces. Every single one. Some days I can still see them clear as daylight there. Uniforms, the way they moved, the look in their eyes before I pulled the trigger. You don't erase that. You live with it." Walker listened in silence, his throat tight. "The first one," she continued, "I thought I was ready. I had trained for years, drilled until breathing and aiming were the same thing. I spotted him, lined up the shot, exhaled, squeezed. Clean kill. My congratulated me. Said it was the start of something great. That night I couldn't close my eyes without seeing him fall. I thought it would fade with time. It didn't. It multiplied." Her hands clenched. The knuckles went pale. 2, 10, 50, 100. Each one etched itself into me. Not like scars on the skin, those fade. "These," she tapped her temple lightly. "These don't." Walker felt the words sink into him. He'd killed before, in firefights where the line between survival and death was seconds thin. But the thought of 305 deliberate precision shots, it was something else entirely. Morgan's tone softened slightly. Command called it efficiency. They called me an asset. They never asked what it cost. Every medal, every commendation, it's a receipt. Proof that I paid the price in pieces of myself. Walker's chest tightened. He wanted to say something, anything that might lighten the weight she carried. But he realized quickly there were no words that could erase it. Why keep the medal then? He asked quietly. Her eyes flicked toward him, sharp again. Because it's the truth. They tried to bury me in classified files, erase my existence when it suited them. But that medal, it's proof I was real. Proof I fought, that I bled, that I mattered even if they'd rather I didn't. She reached into her pocket, pulled the medal out, and let it rest in her palm. The medal glinted faintly under starlight. It's not pride, she said. It's memory. I keep it because if I throw it away, those 305 become just numbers again. And I won't dishonor them like that. Walker sat back, overwhelmed. He realized then that Morgan wasn't haunted only by what she had done. She was haunted by the way the world had reduced it to digits in a file, to whispers in barracks, to a burden carried in silence. She slipped the medal back into her pocket and stood, brushing sand from her fatigues. You asked how I carry it, she said, looking down at him. The truth is, I don't. I survive with it. That's not the same thing. Walker nodded. Slowly. And if the number climbs higher? Her expression was unreadable, but her voice was steel. Then I keep surviving. Until the day I can't. When she walked away into the night, Walker remained where he was, staring at the empty spot she'd left behind. The fire crackled low. Soldiers shifted in their sleep, but all he could hear was her voice echoing in his mind. They weren't just numbers, they were faces. He realized something then. The weight of 305 wasn't hers alone anymore. By listening, by asking, he had taken a fraction of it onto himself. Not enough to ease her burden, but enough to feel its gravity. Enough to respect it. He lay down in his foxhole, rifle at his side, eyes on the stars. Sleep didn't come easy, but when it did, he dreamed not of faceless enemies or nameless kills. He dreamed of Morgan, her eyes like sharpened steel, her voice carrying the heavy truth of war. And when dawn came, painting the desert in pale gold, he knew one thing with certainty. He would never look at her the same way again. The sun rose slow and unforgiving, turning the desert into a furnace of gold and fire. Dust hung in the air from the convoy that had finally arrived, reinforcements from Kandahar. Their Humvees roared across the horizon, kicking up trails of grit as they rumbled into the riverbed where Morgan, Walker, and their battered squad had spent the night. For the first time in days, Walker felt a flicker of relief. Extra guns, extra supplies, a chance to breathe. But the air shifted almost immediately when the reinforcements piled out. The moment one soldier laid eyes on Morgan, everything changed. She had been leaning against her rifle, calm as ever, helmet tilted low to shade her eyes from the glare. But when Sergeant First Class Daniels climbed down from the lead vehicle, his gaze froze. His face went pale beneath the desert grime, as though he had seen a ghost. No way, he muttered, voice thick with disbelief. Morgan straightened slowly, eyes narrowing. Daniels approached, helmet tucked under his arm, staring like he couldn't trust what he was seeing. It's you, he said, almost breathless. I'll be damned. It's really you. The rest of the reinforcements began to gather, their murmurs rising like ripples across water. Walker stiffened, sensing trouble. What are you talking about, Sergeant? Daniels didn't look at him. His eyes stayed locked on Morgan. You don't know who you've been fighting alongside, do you? This is Sergeant Morgan Howell. His voice carried an edge, half awe, half unease. The ghost sniper. The woman with 300 kills to her name. The riverbed fell silent. The name hung in the air, heavy and electric. Walker's heart clenched. He had suspected, had even begun to believe after her confession the night before, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. This wasn't just rumor or speculation. This was confirmation. The soldiers exchanged glances, some whispering, others staring outright. Morgan didn't flinch. She met Daniel's gaze head-on, her jaw tight, her eyes cold. "I'm not that person anymore," she said flatly. Daniels laughed, shaking his head. "You can't outrun a record like that. 305. I read the after-action reports. I heard the stories. Hell, the Taliban put a bounty on your head so high. They called you a ghost because they thought you couldn't be killed. And here you are, flesh and blood." Morgan's lips pressed thin. "Stories are dangerous things, Sergeant." Walker stepped between them, trying to diffuse the tension. "Does it matter who she is? She saved our lives. That's what counts." But Daniels wasn't listening. His voice rose, carrying across the squad. "You all know what this means? We're fighting alongside a legend. A killer who should have been retired years ago, but somehow ended up back here." He turned back to Morgan. "What are you doing with a line unit, Halle? You're supposed to be buried under black files and redacted names." Morgan's stare hardened. "I didn't ask to be here." The squad was buzzing now, questions thrown into the heat like sparks. Some men looked impressed, almost reverent. Others looked uneasy, shifting their weight, unable to meet her eyes. Walker felt the ground slipping beneath them. Morgan had survived by staying invisible, by keeping her name buried. Now that cover was gone. And once a secret this heavy spilled into the open, there was no stuffing it back. Daniels stepped closer, his voice dropping but still sharp. "Command will want to know. Hell, the whole base will want to know. You can't hide anymore." Morgan's expression didn't change, but Walker noticed her fingers flex subtly against the stock of her rifle, an unconscious tick, like she was bracing for impact. "Let them talk," she said quietly. "They don't know the weight," Daniel scoffed. "Maybe not, but they'll sure as hell want to use you again. A weapon like you doesn't get left on the shelf." That was the spark. Walker saw the flicker of fire in her eyes, the same fire she'd shown the night before when she confessed about the medal. "I'm not their weapon anymore," she snapped. The words cracked through the air like a rifle shot. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Walker finally found his voice. "That's enough." His tone carried authority, surprising even himself. He looked from Daniels to the rest of the soldiers. "She's one of us. She's been fighting, bleeding, and saving lives the same as anyone else here. Whatever her past is, it doesn't change the fact that she's here now, keeping us alive." Daniels smirked, but he didn't push further. The damage was done. The whispers had spread. Morgan's name, her real name, was out. She turned her back to the crowd, walking toward the edge of the camp. Her movements were calm, deliberate, but Walker knew better. He knew the storm was inside her, building. He followed a few steps behind, giving her space. When they were far enough from the others, he spoke. "You knew this would happen eventually, didn't you?" Her jaw tightened. "It always does." "And what now?" She exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Now I wait. Command will hear. And when they do, they'll decide if I'm an asset again or a liability." Walker's stomach churned. He wanted to say she was more than that she wasn't just what Command saw. But he knew Morgan had lived long enough under their shadow to understand the truth better than anyone. The day dragged on, hot, and suffocating. Reinforcements. Set up perimeter defenses, resupplied ammo, and patched vehicles. But beneath the motions, the atmosphere was strained. Everywhere Morgan went, eyes followed. Some filled with respect, others with unease, all tinged with curiosity. By nightfall, the whispers had grown into something larger. Her legend had awakened, no longer buried. Around the fire, Walker sat close to Morgan again. Her posture was rigid, her eyes scanning the flames. "They won't stop talking," he said softly. "They never do," she replied. "That's why I walked away once." But walking away doesn't erase what you are. Walker studied her face, seeing not just the hardened soldier, but the cracks underneath the fatigue, the scars invisible to anyone who hadn't listened the way he had. "Whatever comes," he said firmly, "I've got your back." She glanced at him, her expression unreadable in the firelight. After a long silence, she gave the faintest nod. The desert night grew colder, and above them the stars burned sharp and distant. But neither Walker nor Morgan slept easily, because they both knew the truth. Once a ghost was unmasked, she could never fade into the shadows again. And somewhere, out there, beyond the perimeter, enemies who had hunted her name before might already be listening. The weight of 305 had just become heavier. The desert was too still, that eerie kind of quiet that pressed against the skin and gnawed at nerves. Morgan felt it before anyone else, the shift in the air, the unnatural silence of birds gone, the subtle tension that only meant one thing. "They're coming," she muttered. Walker looked up from where he was checking his rifle. "You sure?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her eyes tracked the ridgelines, every instinct whispering what her ears couldn't yet hear. The enemy wasn't finished. News traveled fast in Afghanistan, faster than convoys. And now that her name had been spoken aloud, Morgan knew the Taliban had a reason to return. Not just to fight, to hunt. The attack came at dusk. The first RPG screamed across the valley, smashing into a Humvee at the edge of camp. Fire blossomed into the sky, throwing silhouettes of scrambling soldiers into sharp relief. Then came the rattle of machine gun fire, the angry echoes bouncing off stone and sand. "Contact, North Ridge!" Daniels shouted, scrambling into position. With his men, Walker dove beside Morgan, bullets chewing the dirt around them. "They know you're here," he said breathlessly. "I told you," she replied, calm even as chaos erupted. The ghost never stays hidden. Mortar rounds whistled down, pounding the camp. Sandbags burst, radios crackled, and the reinforcements scrambled to organize a defense. But the enemy had numbers, and worse, they had intent. This wasn't just an ambush. It was an execution attempt. "They want her," Daniels realized aloud, ducking behind cover. "They came for Hal." Morgan adjusted the scope on her rifle, her eyes cold. "Then let's give them a fight they'll remember." She moved like the legend she was said to be. Each shot from her rifle cracked with precision, cutting through the din. Enemy fighters dropped one after another, some before they even knew where she was. Walker stayed close, covering her flanks, but couldn't help glancing sideways at her. In that moment, she wasn't just Sergeant Holly. She was the ghost sniper, the shadow every enemy feared in their nightmares. And though awe filled him, so did dread, because he could see what it cost her. Every pull of the trigger weighed heavy, every life taken etching deeper into scars no one else could see. The firefight stretched brutal into the night. Reinforcements held the perimeter, returning fire with everything they had. Still, the Taliban pressed hard, circling, probing for weakness. It wasn't random, it was targeted. Their lines bent always toward her. "They won't stop," Walker said grimly between bursts of fire. Not until I'm gone," Morgan finished. Her tone was matter-of-fact, but her eyes flared with something else. Resolve. Walker grabbed her shoulder, pulling her down as a spray of bullets whizzed overhead. Don't you even think about it. You don't get to decide this ends with you. Her stare lingered on him, unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. Then we finish it together. She made her move when the enemy shifted, attempting to rush the north barricade. Morgan climbed higher onto the rocks, using elevation to her advantage. Her shots thundered methodically, thinning their push. Every round was poetry, each kill surgical. The Taliban faltered, pinned under her precision. Some screamed her name, the ghost, as if shouting it into the night would banish her. It only fueled her. But then the counterstrike came. A mortar slammed into the ridge where she perched. The blast knocked her sprawling, ears ringing, vision swimming. Walker sprinted up the slope, dragging her down just before a second round landed. Dust and flame roared around them. You okay? He shouted. Her hand came away bloody from her temple, but she pushed upright, rifle still clutched tight. Not done yet. Daniel's voice crackled over comms. They're regrouping. Bigger wave coming. Morgan wiped the blood from her eyes, scanning the horizon. She saw at the glow of more trucks, more fighters spilling into the valley. Too many. Walker saw it too, dread coiling in his chest. We can't hold this forever. Morgan's jaw set. We don't need forever. Just long enough. Long enough for what? She didn't answer. She was already moving, setting up her rifle again. The last wave surged. Shadows poured down the ridges, shouting, firing, relentless. The camp erupted in a storm of muzzle. Flashes and screams. Soldiers braced, firing until barrels smoked, praying the line wouldn't break. And then the ghost went to work. Her rifle sang, cutting through the tide. Every shot slowed the rush, each target falling before they even cleared cover. Panic rippled through enemy ranks, men shouting, some dropping their weapons, others firing wildly into the dark. But it wasn't enough. Still they came, sheer numbers threatening to drown them. Walker fired beside her, desperation in every squeeze of the trigger. Morgan, we can't. Her voice cut firm. We can. Because suddenly, the sky split. The reinforcements' radio had finally broken through. Overhead, the rumble of aircraft engines grew, deafening and low. Then came the thunder. 10 warthogs screaming down from the clouds, their cannons shredding the valley. Explosions lit the night, tearing through enemy trucks, scattering fighters like sand in the wind. The ground shook. The battle turned. What had seemed certain defeat became chaos for the attackers. Soldiers cheered, firing renewed volleys as the Taliban broke ranks, retreating into the dark. Morgan lowered her rifle at last, shoulders heaving. The ghost had held the line. When the dust cleared, the camp was a ruin of fire and twisted metal. The wounded were gathered, the dead counted, the living too exhausted to celebrate. Walker found Morgan sitting apart, rifle across her knees, staring into the flames of a wrecked Humvee. You did it, he said quietly. She shook her head. We did it. But her voice carried no triumph, just weariness. Walker sat beside her. You know they'll never let this go. Daniels will talk. Command will hear. Your name won't stay buried. She met his eyes, steady but tired. I know, but maybe that's not the curse I thought it was. Maybe being seen isn't the same as being used. Walker studied her for a moment, then nodded. Then whatever comes next, you don't face it alone. For the first time, a faint smile tugged at her lips. Not joy, something quieter. Relief. The desert wind carried the smoke away, revealing a sky littered with stars. The battle was over. But for Morgan Hall, the war within, was still being fought. Still, For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her legend shift. No longer a ghost. Not just a weapon. Something else. Maybe, just maybe, something human.